Supreme Court allows Texas age verification law for app stores for now. What happened? Reuters, The New York Times, Politico, CNN lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, Reuters, The New York Times, Politico, CNN identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Stakes. The stakes are whether the ruling changes what officials can do next or leaves the dispute headed for another court fight. Watch next. The next dated agency notice or court order. The cited coverage from Reuters, The New York Times, Politico, CNN should be checked against later bylined or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from Reuters, The New York Times, Politico, CNN with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from Reuters, The New York Times, Politico, CNN will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. Trump defends call urging Balogun red card review. It wasn't a foul. What happened? Reuters, CNBC top, Al Jazeera, The Hill lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, Reuters, CNBC top, Al Jazeera, The Hill identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Background, I didn't know what the hell a red card was, said Trump, who called FIFA President Gianni Infantino about the watch next. The next company statement, market close, or regulatory filing. The cited coverage from Reuters, CNBC top, Al Jazeera, The Hill should be checked against later bylined or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from Reuters, CNBC top, Al Jazeera, The Hill with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from Reuters, CNBC top, Al Jazeera. The Hill will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. Historic World Cup furor at incomprehensible FIFA decision to let U.S. forward Balogun play. What happened? WHO 13, NPR News, NPR, the Canadian Press News lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, WHO 13, NPR News, NPR, the Canadian Press News identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Stakes. The risk is that later filings, statements, or market closes could change how the development affects the public. Watch next. The next rescue bulletin, police update, or official incident timeline. The cited coverage from WHO 13, NPR News, NPR, the Canadian Press News should be checked against later bylined or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from WHO 13, NPR News, NPR, the Canadian Press News with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from WHO 13, NPR News, NPR, the Canadian Press News will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. Trump says he overruled recommendation to cancel July 4 event on the National Mall. What happened? Just security, The Hill, The Washington Post, Fox News lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, just security, The Hill, The Washington Post, Fox News identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Background, a presidential override of cancellation advice can affect how agencies balance crowd safety, weather risk, and symbolic national events. Watch next. The next diplomatic statement, military briefing, or legislative vote. The cited coverage from just security, The Hill, The Washington Post, Fox News should be checked against later bylined or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from just security, The Hill, The Washington Post, Fox News with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from just security, The Hill, The Washington Post, Fox News will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell to donate stock to Trump accounts. What happened? CNBC top, The Times of India, The Straits Times, Business Insider lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, CNBC top, The Times of India, The Straits Times, Business Insider identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Stakes, President Donald Trump told. Watch next. The next customs guidance, trade notice, or formal negotiating text. The cited coverage from CNBC top, The Times of India, The Straits Times, Business Insider should be checked against later byline or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from CNBC top, The Times of India, The Straits Times, Business Insider with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from CNBC top, The Times of India, The Straits Times, Business Insider will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. Russian attacks on Ukraine kill 20 on eve of NATO summit, authorities say. What happened? Courthouse News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, France 24 lay out the current status, and the next step turns on the named officials, companies, markets, courts, rescue teams, or diplomats in the case. Evidence, Courthouse News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, France 24 identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Stakes, battlefield pressure complicates any peace opening. Watch next. The next dated agency notice or court order. The cited coverage from Courthouse News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, France 24 should be checked against later byline or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint. Compare any update from Courthouse News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, France 24 with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from Courthouse News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, France 24 will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. More than 300 children killed or injured in Sudan war in 6 months, UNICEF says. What happened? Sudan, amid lethal drone attacks, children bear brunt of escalating war. Evidence, UN News, AP News, Los Angeles Times, The Tribune Democrat identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Stakes, the stakes are whether investigators or emergency officials confirm new details that change the public safety picture. Watch next. The next company statement, market close, or regulatory filing. The cited coverage from UN News, AP News, Los Angeles Times, The Tribune Democrat should be checked against later byline or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint, compare any update from UN News, AP News, Los Angeles Times, The Tribune Democrat with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from UN News, AP News, Los Angeles Times, The Tribune Democrat will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path. Hamas offers to hand over authority in Gaza to US-backed administration. What happened? Hamas dissolves Gaza governing body ahead of power transfer. Evidence. The Guardian, NBC News, ABC News and Headlines, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, The Jerusalem Post identify the source base, with the coverage tying the development to public remarks, agency notices, company statements, market data, court action, rescue authorities, or diplomatic statements. Background, Hamas dissolves Gaza governing body ahead of power transfer. Stakes. The stakes are whether the next military, diplomatic, or humanitarian update widens the impact for civilians and governments. Watch next. The next rescue bulletin, police update, or official incident timeline. The cited coverage from The Guardian, NBC News, ABC News and Headlines, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The Jerusalem Post should be checked against later bylined or institutional updates before the story is treated as settled. Checkpoint, compare any update from The Guardian, NBC News, ABC News and Headlines, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The Jerusalem Post with the next dated filing, vote, agency notice, market close, rescue bulletin, diplomatic statement, or court order before treating the status as changed. The next confirmed record from The Guardian, NBC News, ABC News and Headlines, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The Jerusalem Post will matter because it can clarify whether officials treat the move as final, revise the dollar figure, or describe a remaining court or agency path.